Chapter 11, Part 3. Cedar Lane was not far from Elm, and it took Daniel all of 10 minutes to make the bike ride, even favoring his bad arm. If he made good time, he hoped he could be there and back before his dad returned with Georgie from daycare. What was surprising was that Cedar turned out to be a private lane, with only a lone, large house at the end of the street. Actually, house was an understatement. If there was a single mansion in Noble's Green, this was it. Tall pillars of white marble lined the broad entranceway of immaculately kept front garden. A white, old-fashioned arched roof peeked over the trees. Herman Plunkett had obviously done very well for himself. As Daniel walked up the winding garden path to the front door, he played a little game with himself. He tried to guess what Herman Plunkett, the creator of Johnny Noble, might look like. Would he have a kindly face, bug-eyed spectacles hanging from the bridge of his nose? Maybe a big bold pipe like the one Sherlock Holmes smoked. Maybe he was still writing and drawing, and Daniel would find him hunched over his draftsman table, sketching away. As he approached the pathway's end, Daniel noticed a well-dressed older gentleman standing a few feet away, reading the paper. The man wore an expensive suit and had a neat white beard. He smiled as Daniel approached. "Excuse me," said Daniel. "I'm here to see Mr. Plunkett." "Oh, I think you'll find him inside. Just ring the bell and tell his nurse you're here to see him." "Oh, thanks," said Daniel. "Not a problem, son," the man said with a smile, and went back to his paper. Daniel wondered what this man's job might be, standing out here all alone. Security, maybe? He was a big guy, if a bit on the old side. Daniel rang the front bell, and after a minute or so, a woman's plump face appeared at the door. Hi. My name is Daniel Corrigan, and I was wondering if I could speak to Mr. Plunkett. See, I'm a big fan of his work, and I was hoping to get an autograph." "Mr. Plunkett's work?" the fat nurse scoffed. "You're a fan of businessmen, are you?" No, his comic books. See, I have a bunch of comics that Mr. Plunkett drew a long time ago." He opened his backpack and showed her the contents. With his arm in a sling, it was a struggle to do that much. "Comic books, huh?" she asked, peering into the bag. "Well, I wouldn't know anything about that. Mr. Plunkett was a very well-regarded businessman in his day, but he's long retired now. And you really should try reading real books. You know, those things will rot your brain." Daniel sighed. This woman was a real pain. He looked over his shoulder to see if he might get some assistance from the well-dressed gentleman, but the man was gone. "Hold on," said the nurse, looking him up and down. "I'll go and see if he's awake." "Awake?" thought Daniel. "It's only 4 p.m. Just how old is this guy?" The nurse returned after a few long minutes. "Mr. Plunkett will see you, but you don't have any sweets on you, do you? Mr. Plunkett is on a strict diet and can't have any sweets." No, I don't have any candy." She glanced at his backpack. "You sure? You little boys are always carrying around chocolate bars or licorice drops." "Licorice drops? Nothing, I promise. Can I please go and see Mr. Plunkett now?" "Fine, go on. He's in the reading room. This way. But don't let him bribe you into sneaking him any treats. He knows better." The reading room turned out to be a small annex of the main building, and through the glass doors were rows and rows of books, newspapers, and magazines. Several comfortable overstuffed chairs dotted the room, each equipped with its own reading lamp. In the chair closest to the window sat a shriveled little man wearing an old sweater and bulky glasses. He was so small that his feet barely touched the floor, and his face was buried in an old paper bag. Despite the thick glasses, he had the book pressed so close to his face that it almost touched his nose. On the book's cover was an illustration of a spaceman jet-packing toward an exploding rocket. This had to be Herman Plunkett. As Daniel opened the door, Plunkett's head popped up from behind his book, his beady eyes peering over the edge of his glasses. Who's there?" The old man was surprisingly skittish, like a turtle ready to pop back into his shell. "Excuse me, sir, but are you Herman Plunkett?" "Who's asking?" "My name is Daniel Corrigan. I think your nurse told you I was here." Oh, the boy with the comic books." "Yes, sir," said Daniel. Plunkett slid down out of his chair and began cleaning a stack of newspapers off a nearby footstool. He shuffled the pile of papers onto a coffee table, already weighted down with heaps of old encyclopedias and other reference books. "Here you are, then," he said, patting the seat of the footstool. Daniel let the reading room door close behind him and sat down, his backpack held tightly in his good arm. Plunkett hopped back into his chair and folded his hands neatly in his lap. "So, young man, fancy yourself a comic book fanatic, eh?" "You bet," Daniel lied. "Actually, Mr. Plunkett, I'm really more interested in the classics. I'm a Golden Age fan." "You don't say. Funny to find a boy your age who gives a darn about such things. Most youngsters these days are too interested in their video games, full of explosions and the like. No time for real stories." Plunkett leaned in close and winked conspiratorially. "Say, you don't have any sweets in that little backpack of yours, do you? Maybe a licorice drop or two?" No, sir. I'm sorry." "Shame. I sure could go for a licorice drop." Daniel smiled uncomfortably at the old man, and then looked around at the reading room that Herman Plunkett had constructed for himself. The stacks seemed to be made up almost entirely of old pulp novels and hardback adventure anthologies from the 19th and early 20th century, all in mint condition. It was like walking into a library out of time. This Plunkett fellow was a man who had found his niche and stuck with it. One book in particular caught Daniel's eye. A brown, leather-bound volume propped up alone on a side shelf. Although the gold lettering of the title was faded, Daniel could still make out the author, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. "Sherlock Holmes, The Final Problem," said Plunkett, noticing Daniel's interest. "You're a Sherlockian, young man?" "A what?" Daniel asked. "A Sherlockian, a devotee of the world's greatest detective." Daniel thought about it. He had never heard the term before, but he liked the sound of it. "Yeah, I guess so, but I haven't read that one. It looks pretty old." Plunkett hopped down from his chair and grabbed the volume off its shelf. For a little old man, he was surprisingly spry. "The Final Problem," by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. "First published in 1893, said Plunkett, dusting off the spine. "This here is a later edition, but still valuable. One of the few books in my library not meant for reading. The Death of Sherlock Holmes. Careful with it now." Plunkett handed the book to Daniel, who set it down gently on an empty table. It was too hard to hold with only one good arm. He carefully lifted the cover and reverently flipped through the first few pages. On the title was an illustration of two men wrestling on a bridge, overlooking an ominous waterfall. "It's a drawing of Holmes fighting his arch-enemy, Professor Moriarty, at Rickenback Falls," Plunkett explained. "Their fighting pushes them both over the bridge, and they tumble over the falls to their shared doom. A grand death, very dramatic. Of course, Doyle brought him back eventually," Plunkett said with a smile. "No one stays dead for long in adventure stories." Daniel studied the illustration in detail, the ominous scenery, the expressions of desperation on the faces of the two men. Daniel found it upsetting, really, looking at the moment before the death of his hero. It took him a minute or so to find the artist's signature. There, hidden in the fine pencil work of the rushing waterfall, was the initials H.P. "You drew this?" Daniel asked. "I did, back when I was a young freelancer. Back then, I'd accept any hack job with a paycheck. But that one I'd have done for free. That was a labor of love." Daniel closed the book and reached inside his backpack. He pulled out the bundle of plastic-bagged comics and set them in front of Mr. Plunkett. "Did you also draw these?" Plunkett squinted behind his thick glasses and held one of the comics up to his nose. Daniel watched as his wrinkled face spread into a wide grin. "Well, what do you know?" he said, thumbing through the other issues. "Hello there, Johnny." Plunkett settled back into his chair and with great gentleness began turning the pages. He was drinking in every panel, every page. "I haven't seen one of these in good condition in... Well, I can't tell you, it's been so long. Where'd you get 'em?" "A friend gave them to me. They were passed down in his family." "Must be some friend. You know, these babies are worth a pretty penny." "Yeah, but we're not interested in selling them." "Good boy. Wow, will you look at how well the color held up. You know, I still have the pencils to some of these, but I haven't seen one printed in color in a long time. A long time." Daniel had obviously gotten on Plunkett's good side with the revelation of a nearly full run of comic books written and drawn by Herman Plunkett. Right now, Plunkett was busy basking in the glow of his own fandom. Daniel didn't let the moment pass. So, is it true that you wrote them all yourself? And you did the art? It is. I was a young man when I did these, still chasing the dream of being a real artist. That was before I gave it all up and got a real job. I was always good at drawing and numbers, but there's a lot more money in numbers, as you can see. Plunkett gestured to the luxurious surroundings, and Daniel nodded appreciatively. Daniel wasn't sure exactly what numbers he was referring to, but they obviously paid well. But this, said Plunkett, his attention back on the comics. Well, this was my passion. I was working on Fantastic Futures back when I was just a science fiction magazine. Then the world went crazy for superheroes, and we started using Johnny as our lead story. Unfortunately, by the time we got rolling, the market had started to fill up. It's amazing that book lasted as long as it did, really. How'd you come up with the character? I mean, was he based on anyone? Daniel hesitated, unsure whether to warm up the old guy some more or just plunge right in. If you like this audiobook, please subscribe.